YouTube, Facebook, everybody's here together, and we're exploring the Parsha of Vayishlach. I got my Chumash right in front of me. If you have yours, then join along. What we'll do is we'll just do a quick exploration of the Parsha, but I want to start off in today's reading, the Chumash portion we're reading today. So just last week we read Vayetze. Vayetze was where Yaakov left his family home, left his parents behind in the city of Beersheba in Israel, and he's going to Haran, which is actually a place in Turkey. There he's going to, in Haran, he's going to work for his uncle for all these years. And as we read in the Parsha in the last, just on Shabbos, the portion of Vayetze described his journey and you have one Parsha describing all these years of what happens to his family during that time, how he amassed his wealth, and how he gets to how he and his wives father 13 children, and everything else we read there. So it was a fascinating Parsha. But as much as Vayetze, he's leaving, now Vayishlach, he's going back and he's coming back home. But he is fearful because remember, his brother Esav is vengeful, is angry, is upset that he got the blessings. And so Yaakov needs a plan on how he's going to meet up with his brother Esav. How's he going to deal with this? So that's what this parsha is about. Vayishlach Yaakov malachim. Yaakov sends messengers, or as Rashi says, actual angels, to go out to his brother. And his brother also is coming with. His brother's also coming with 400 men. He's preparing for war. They haven't seen each other all these years. Esav is still upset. Esav is still angry about his brother stealing his blessings. And we'll talk more about that deception in today's shiur, about the deception in the Torah and the different perspectives and ways of seeing it. But Yaakov, as a peaceful overture, he sends the messengers and he sends gifts. He wants to greet his brother. And in general, this is what today's topic of discussion is, how to deal with confrontation, with conflict. We want to avoid it at all costs. But sometimes there are certain situations where we have to deal with the conflicts that come our way. How are we going to deal with them? What are we going to do? What is going to be our method? Yaakov Avinu prepares in 3 ways. Number 1, he sends gifts of appeasement. We certainly have to try that method. The second thing he tries to do is he's ready for war. And that, unfortunately, sometimes we have to be prepared. And it's interesting, there's a Talmudic expression that says as follows: Habala hargacha, if somebody's coming to harm you, hashkem, you get up. You are going to take the offensive. That's what Israel did in 1967, a preemptive strike. And in personal battles as well, that's sometimes necessary to take that preemptive strike, and you do so. But there's a difference in the way the language that the Talmud uses. Some versions of the Talmud say, Hashkem the hargo, you preemptively strike and hit that person so that they won't mess with you. The other one is Hashkem leharga, you get up to harm them, but you're not necessarily actually going to physically harm them. But they know that you are armed, you are ready. You're ready for any scenario, and you're ready to do so. The third thing Yaakov does is he prays. And we also have to know in life, as much as we face every battle and challenge, all our struggles and difficulties, we have to know to pray to God and ask God for assistance, for help, that we can overcome those situations, the difficulties of life. Because as much as we have to create the receptacle, the vessel, to do so here, we also have to be prepared in a spiritual way and prepare spiritually, which is prayer. Ultimately, we need God's assistance. Well, with that in mind, the messengers come back to Yaakov and they say, Esav is coming to greet you too, but he's got all these men with him ready for battle. Yaakov doesn't know what to do. So as we read in the first verses of the Parsha, he divided his family and his belongings into 2 groups. Because if one group, don't put all your eggs in one basket, as they say. If one group gets struck, at least the other one could hopefully be safe on the side. And as we continue through the Parsha, in Yaakov's attempt to pacify Esav, Yaakov sent all these lavish gifts, and the gifts, just to quickly read through it, consisted of heads of cattle and sheep, or herds of cattle and sheep. And he sent this gift in increments, one herd at a time. That night, Yaakov crossed the Yabok River with his family, and after everyone crossed but himself, that's where he encountered the angel of Esav, Esav's archangel, who wrestled with him until the night. But it's interesting, you look at the language, it's about Ya'avik Ishimai, a person wrestled with him, his sparring partner. And though the angel was unable to prevail over Yaakov, but he dislodged Yaakov's sciatic nerve, causing him to limp. And ever since then, we don't eat the hind quarter of an animal because to commemorate that event. Of course, Yaakov's name is changed from Yaakov, which is more of a struggling personality. He's holding on to his brother's ankle when he's born. He's always trying to catch up and hold on to his brother, whereas now his name is changed to Yisrael. Yisrael means that he, Kisarisam Elokim Vatuchal, he overcame the struggles, the battles, and that's the name Yisrael, that he overcame his battles with, as it says, Melekim v'manashim, his spiritual as well as his physical struggles. He's victorious. And now we, the Jewish people, are forever called by that name. Now, of course, the name Jew comes from Yehuda, who was the son of Yaakov. We'll get to that one soon. But Yisrael, we're Am Yisrael, we're the people of Israel, we are the nation of Israel, the land of Israel, all named after this name of Yaakov that is changed here in the second Aliyah. In the third Aliyah, the Torah informs us this mitzvah that we do not eat the sciatic nerve or that side of an animal to commemorate this event. And then we read here how Esav arrived and Yaakov respectfully approached his brother, who then ran towards him and embraced him, and they both wept. And the Parsha continues here and tells us Yaakov's family approached and greeted Esav. Despite Esav's objections, Yaakov prevailed upon him to accept the gift that he sent ahead. And we're going to read this through in the Parsha, and I think there's a lot of fascinating ideas. Maybe that's enough to just look at in the Parsha before we begin the discussion that I wanted to have today. And really, today's discussion is about taking the lessons and messages we could take from this story and applying them to our life on how to deal with our struggles, not just Yaakov and his struggles as we see in the Parsha, but also our own personal struggles, because after all, the Torah is not his story, the Torah is our story. And after all, when we talk about these struggles and challenges, it's not just the struggles and challenges that Yaakov experienced, but ours too. Remind me of an old joke I once heard. Phone rings and little Moshe answers. So the fella says, "Can I speak to your parents?" He says, "No, they're busy." He says, "Anybody else there?" He says, "The police." He says, "Can I speak to them?" He says, "They're busy." He says, "Anybody else there?" He says, "The firemen." "But they're busy too." So your parents, the police, the firemen, everybody's busy. What are they all doing? So they're looking for me, Moshe says. We could, in our own lives, sometimes we miss the importance of looking for something. And when we're searching, when we know we need to be somewhere other than where we are now, and working to bring that about, we want to make it happen, we gain a sense of purpose and direction that we might otherwise lack. So when we look in our Parsha, we read about several travelers, each on their own path, each one looking for something. And as we could see, it's not the case that everyone's always traveling in the same direction as we've been reading here. In fact, it's what we're looking for that allows us to fork from the path of our enemies. And like Yaakov in our Parsha, it's in a way our searching that prevents us from becoming lost, because we know what we're looking for. You have to know what you're looking for, where you're coming from, in order to know where to go. So in our Parsha, we're reading here about Yaakov, who is looking for Esav, and he wants to go home, and he wants to make peace, and he finally does make peace. before he's fleeing from his brother, he's escaping, he's running away. And when it comes time, now that they've met and they're getting back together, but Yaakov says, you know what? He says, I don't think it's time for us to stick together now. Yaakov says, rather, let's part ways. Esav says, no, come together. Yaakov says, you know what? I'll catch up to you. I'm going to go slowly. I got a big family. It's going to take me some time. I'll catch up to you. That's what Yaakov says. Let's look at this verse in our parsha. Chapter 33, verse 14. That's where I'm holding. What does Yaakov say to Esav? He says, Yaver na adoni lifnei avda. Yaakov says to Esav, let my master go ahead of me. Va'ani isna leli'iti leragal hamalacha. He says to his brother, I'm going to go at a much slower pace, according to the pace of the work that is before me. You got all the children. I'll catch up to you. I'll meet you a little bit later on. Now let's look at Rashi, because always as we study the Torah, we have to read Rashi's commentary on this. So let me read Rashi to you. Says Rashi, Ada sha'ava el adoni seira, until I reach you, my brother Esav, my master, in Seir. Rashi says he told them of a longer journey because they actually never met up again. So although he intended to go only as far as Sukkot, which is another place, another geographic location, Yaakov deceived his brother. He said to himself, if Asa wants to harm me, he'll wait until I come to him. But he never went to him. So when will he go? I mean, Yaakov obviously is a man of truth, the patriarch of the Jewish people. How could he lie to his brother? Says Rashi, he's going to come when Mashiach comes, right? We know this verse, we say it in our prayers every day. We're going to come there eventually. Eventually we'll get there. So Yaakov implied to Esav that he would eventually travel to Seir, right? But he never really did so. He never really came there. It seems that he had no intention in actually going there, at this stage at least. Rashi says he'll get there when Mashiach comes. Now, if you want to just analyze Rashi a little bit puzzling. If Yaakov did not actually intend to go to Seir, at least not before Mashiach comes, how did he expect to get away with this deception? Certainly, if Esav meant Yaakov harm, he wanted to hurt him, he would eventually stop waiting for his brother. Maybe he would go find him wherever he is to harm him. And more so, I don't think it's befitting the patriarch of the Jewish people to be deceptive like that. So why would Rashi tell us this? Now, I understand we're allowed to lie sometimes to save lives. So that's my typical answer, I would say, that you want to save a life. So Yaakov is afraid of going to his brother because his brother had a violent personality, and he was angry with him, and he's still vengeful. But why lie to protect himself from Esav, given that Esav will eventually realize that Yaakov is not coming? Maybe he's going to go follow him and pursue him. How could Yaakov justify lying on the chance that maybe Esav is not really truthful? What's this about? And the truth is, I got more questions. How do we understand this explanation of Rashi here? Isn't Rashi generally is about giving us a good understanding of the Torah. So why is he explaining this with this seemingly deception of Yaakov? Ladies and gents, you all with me? That's my question. And to answer this, I want to share with you an answer I read from the Abarbanel, very famous commentary on the Torah. He was a Spanish rabbi and statesman. And so he says as follows, that, let me just read it to you. Okay. He says, to distance Yaakov from empty words and deception, it seems appropriate to explain the verse in an unconventional way. Yaakov says, until I come to my master. What he means is, until I come to my master, not you, Esav, but our father, Yitzchak. That's my master. That's the respectful way. Even in benching, when we say, at least in my family, is a tradition, we say, Bershus Avi Mori, asking permission of my father, my master. So he's saying that even though Esav understands master as being himself, because that's the way Yaakov is respectfully speaking to him, but that's the way Abarbanel sees it, that he's talking about when after I see Yitzchak. So, trying to make sense of this. If there's a way to read Yaakov's words in a truthful way, why does Rashi choose to interpret them in a way that basically presents deception? As if our patriarch is so deceptive. And if we dive a little bit deeper into Rashi's words, we could do a little bit of nitpicking. Why does Rashi add that Yaakov will eventually end up in Seir only when Mashiach comes? How's that? So Rashi wants to truthifies Yaakov by saying he will get there eventually when Mashiach comes. What does that tell us? What is the meaning of this? What's the purpose? And in fact, just to point out one more thing from Rashi, Rashi tells us that there are other midrashic interpretations on this. Basically, I'm just sharing with you one, but Rashi tells us there's so many more explanations. Why do we even need to know that? Why do we need to know that there are so many more interpretations to this verse that Rashi tells us? So, the way I want to try to understand this is to understand that Yaakov's words were not limited to the time and space when he said them. But obviously, like all stories in the Torah, it's relevant to us. They're timeless messages that can be applied and interpreted in every era and every place. And this is certainly so when it comes to our patriarchs and matriarchs. What is the famous teaching? It says, Maisa avas siman labanim, that the deeds, the stories of our ancestors are a lesson for us, their descendants. So there's certainly a message in here for us too. This isn't just about the story of Yaakov in our parsha, but rather there's a message here for us. Of course, we need to know what is the message for us today. Now, right off the bat, there's lots of commentaries that discuss this. For example, the Paneach Raza understands Yaakov's strategy. What is Yaakov misleading Esav? He says it's an example of how we are to deal with our challenges in this world. On a spiritual level, Yaakov was conceding to Esav that this era, when Jews are suffering, when we struggle, when we go through our difficulties, he says that this tells us how to. This will give us insight that ultimately our solution is only when Mashiach comes. Mashiach will be the ultimate solution to all of our struggles. And just to read to you, this commentary says that the final words, the last letters of these words, spells out the word Eliyahu and tells us that the harbinger of Mashiach will be Elijah the prophet. Now, it's interesting. What happened to my sound? Is it gone? Can nobody hear me? Can anyone tell me if you're struggling to hear me? I was just informed that nobody could hear me. Guys? Uh-oh. Not sure what's going on. Can anybody else tell me? Barney says that the sound is gone.
Oh, I could hear you fine, Rabbi.
You could hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you. All right. So if anyone else is struggling with the sound, I'm not sure what to do, but Leo says he could hear me. Thank you, Leo, for that. So when we look at it from this perspective, what is he telling us? That you can take this world, Yaakov said. You can have this world. It's all for you. And I'll meet you in the next world, which I'll take for myself, Olam Haba, which is really what the struggle, what the reward of the firstborn was. Just a second, let me see. Okay, I can't see exactly. I see messages that not everybody's able to hear properly. I'm not sure why. All right, so Barney, welcome back. Are you still struggling to hear? Let me know if you're struggling and I'll try to fix it up. But others here say they could hear fine. I just messaged somebody on the WhatsApp. He says on YouTube, he says he's hearing fine. Okay. So if you're struggling, let me know. I'm not sure what it might be. Maybe pick up the volume on your computer. So this commentary is saying that Yaakov was saying, this world, Esav, is yours. I'll take the next world. That's why he's saying when Mashiach comes. You know, that's a reference to the next world. Now, maybe that's a way of understanding it. Maybe that's another way of seeing it. But why would Yaakov forfeit this world until Mashiach comes? Isn't this a very long time? And also, why should Yaakov lose out? Why is Yaakov volunteering to suffer in exile? Is this some kind of a capitulation? What's it about? So this commentary, the Paneach Raza, I mean, it's definitely interesting, but I'm not feeling satisfied with it. And looking around at various commentaries who give us interesting ways of interpreting and understanding this, I want to look at one from a halachic perspective, from a Jewish legal aspect angle. That somehow the exchange between Yaakov and Esav actually has ramifications in Jewish law. And the rule is that when we're afraid of an idolater, then it has that effect on us. And this is where it talks about the spiritual battle, not just the physical, that Yaakov and Esav were sparring about. So here's an interesting law that it says in Shulchan Aruch, in the Code of Jewish Law. If one who worships idols asks a Jew where he's going, if the Jew only needed to travel a single parsa is like a certain distance, they say it's about 3.8 kilometers, then he should respond that he's traveling 2 parsot, which is more like closer to 8 kilometers. So here's something deceptive. What's going on? Now, just to put it into perspective, in the era when the Shulchan Aruch was written, okay, this was many, many years, millennia after this exchange between Yaakov and Esav. So the author of the Shulchan Aruch, Rabbi Yosef Karo, he sets out the rule that when an idolater asks us where we're traveling, we have to act like Yaakov, where we don't tell them the full truth. Why? For security reasons. Now, idolater, I don't know if idolater is referring to a person who just worships idols, a pagan, or is that a code word for an anti-Semite, for somebody who hates Jews? And I'm not sure how we apply this in today's day and age. You know, this law was written several hundred years ago, where firstly, most Gentiles today are not idol worshippers. Okay? So when he says idol worshippers, is this referring specifically to a pagan, to a person of pagan beliefs, or is it referring to an anti-Semite? I'm not sure. Okay? Because oftentimes when that language is being used, it applies to somebody, not just a typical idol worshiper, but rather someone who has vicious intentions. And therefore, for security reasons, we're not going to tell them exactly where we're going. But basically, what is Rabbi Yosef Karo learning from this verse? The broader implications of deception in Jewish law. Okay, now, of course, what is this telling us? Was Yaakov really so worried that his brother was going to harm him? That he's worried about his safety for his family? Why are we so afraid of why was Yaakov afraid of Esav like that? And, he has to keep his distance, and that this is perpetuated at us as descendants. The same thing in Shulchan Aruch, it's saying, don't tell the truth to an idol worshiper, an anti-Semite, somebody you're afraid of, that it's embedded in Jewish law like this. Thank God, I think we live in much better times today. And we don't have to have that same distance, that feeling that every person's out to get us. But how do we understand what's the relevance of this halacha? How do we apply it to life today? Is it obsolete? Do we say we're not worried that people are out to get us? Or is there some message that's still relevant to us in this law that's written several hundred years ago, based on the narrative in our parsha from several thousand years ago? Of course, the Torah is not his story. The Torah is our story, right? So there's definitely a message and a lesson relevant to us here that we have to glean from this. Now, let's try to unpack this. Let's try to put this all into perspective. As we know, when we talk about the enemy, it's not only about a physical enemy. We're not only talking about anti-Semites who are out to get us, but I think there are also distractions in our life that perhaps could be considered our enemies. Okay? In a spiritual sense, we're talking about distractions. We're talking about, right here on our own little devices, I think we have distractive enemies, things that are, extensions of our evil inclination, that distract us, that pull us in opposite directions. You know what I'm talking about? Or is this just something in me? Notice I'm blushing. Think about the messages that come into our head sometimes. Oh my gosh, Judaism is so demanding, it's so overwhelming, it's so difficult, kosher is so expensive. You know what I'm talking about? Yeah? Think about it. Do you really think you could change and improve and become better? What's this all about? And we get these types of thoughts in our head. And, somebody said to me, he can't keep kosher because it's hypocritical. I'm sure everybody could think of their own situations where these Esavs, these distracting thoughts come into our minds and pull us in opposite directions. So to take the lesson from here, just as Yaakov was afraid that Esav would attack him in his journey, and the Shulchan Aruch therefore says, if you are afraid of a pagan who's going to harm you, Yaakov teaches us how to survive the distractions, the difficulties, and this is embedded in Shulchan Aruch. There's a story that comes to mind that perhaps could, crystallize this idea. A story heard from Rabbi Yisrael Nevler. He said during the First World War, there was a certain Cossack soldier who raced his horse through the enemy camp. The Russians against the Germans. And there was tremendous damage and loss. And when he caused a lot of havoc where he went. When he came back, the soldier was celebrated for his bravery. He was promoted. Now, jealous of his success, there was another soldier who tried to copy those tactics. And he took his own horse and attempted to race through a different enemy camp, but didn't get the same results. Disastrous results. He barely escaped with his life. When he came back, he was actually punished for his misconduct. So he said, what did I do wrong? Why the other guy, he gets rewarded and I'm being punished? So the other Cossack who was rewarded for his bravery, for his courage, he said, you don't understand. I was on the way back to our camp when I stopped off in this Jewish quarter. I needed some food. In those days, the Jews were required to give soldiers with whatever food they wanted, whatever they needed. A soldier came to your house, you had to sort them out. So I saw they were cooking a chalent. So I told the lady, you better put some in my bag. I loaded the bag on my horse and I left with lots of chalent. But the chalent was so hot. on my horse's back that it started galloping in pain to escape. I ended up riding at breakneck speed to the enemy camp, not because I wanted to, but because of the cholent. Says Rabbi Yisrael Neveler, sometimes when we fight the enemy, we're unsuccessful. It is when we're not trying to fight them, like this guy says in his story, but we're focused on our own purpose. I needed some challenge. I need to get going. And we're most victorious. Of course, the idea that I think we're trying to take here, the Kazakh from the story, would realize that if we were to deal with obtrusive, disturbing thoughts directly, sometimes we're dealing directly with the enemy, then we might lose or become captivated by the negativity that we're engaged in. So what do we have to try to do? What's the solution? What's the best way to deal with this type of a situation? Ignore the disturbing thoughts entirely. Instead of focusing on the negative, let's be focused on the positive. Let's fill our minds. We're going to have this in next week's Parsha, where the brothers sell Yosef, and the Torah describes the pit in which he's thrown into as Haborek Ein Bo Mayim. The pit was empty with no water. Says Rashi, no water wasn't there, but snakes and scorpions were there, which is, again, metaphoric language to describe that when our minds are not occupied with Torah, Torah is compared to water, then it's snakes and scorpions. We have other poisonous and disastrous results instead. So if you're planning on consciously invading the enemy camp, if you want to eliminate the negativity, you might get thrown off that horse. You might land up in trouble. But if you just happen to run through it because you're focused on the cholent, you're focused on doing your good, then you will hopefully succeed and overcome the obstacles that are in your way. Beautiful letter of the Rebbe that I want to read to you from 1951. And he says there, we just read through quickly, greeting and blessings. In response to your letter in which you write about disturbing thoughts, says the Rebbe to this person, whoever he's writing it to, you should divert your focus from them entirely and have words of Torah readily available in your mind. Certainly you know chapters of Tanya, of Torah, and he says that there's an expression, quoting from his father-in-law, things crawl into an empty space. Naturally, if our brain is full of words of Torah and prayer, then they're even recorded to memory. They remain seared in our mind. There's nothing that can, when we have nothing to occupy our minds with, then we get distracted. I think this is telling us how to deal with the Asavs, not to let those enemies, the distractions, enter our mind. Ignore them. Fill our mind with something more positive. If we focus too much on fighting the negative energy, then we become like the Kazakh's friend. We're focused on, you can't just get into the enemy's situation. But if we're focused on our own sense of purpose, whatever that might be, in his instance, it was a burning hot bag of cholent, or whatever our mission is, then hopefully by being focused on what I need to do, I think we're in a better position. The Kotzker Rebbe once said, he wants his followers to abstain from sin, not because it's forbidden, but because they don't have spare time. They just don't have time. What he was saying is that if you want to avoid getting involved in the wrong things, just keep yourself busy. What are you busy with? Ask yourself, how are you busy every day? What are you doing to keep yourself occupied? How are you keeping your time filled in a positive, in a good way? And if you're able to do that, keep yourself occupied with the right things, then you don't have to worry about the negativity infiltrating. So I think the lesson that we could all take from this, from the story of Yaakov and our parsha, what's the lesson we could take? That not to get stuck in the negative situation. I want to be focused on my final purpose. Yaakov's final purpose was Mashiach. So although we're here and we're going through our struggles and we have our distractions, but let's remain focused on where we want to go. Not engaging with the enemy. Let's be focused on our purpose. Yaakov didn't want to engage with Esav. He said, I'll meet you when Mashiach comes. That was Yaakov's logic from this perspective. When Yaakov tells Esav that I'll meet you there when Mashiach comes, he says, you go ahead, you engage in this world. By letting him go in his way and us going in ours, we have our mission, our purpose that we need to fulfill. Yaakov's deception, in a spiritual sense, is a lesson for us. Rather than interpret our different path as cowardly avoidance of conflict, say, this is just a deceptive way of saying, I'll see you another time. The way we understand it is that Yaakov was mission focused on his purpose in this world. By focusing on where we're going, on our path to get there, rather than through direct confrontation, that's where he says we'll be victorious, we'll be successful. So I think the message that we need to take is that we need to focus on what is our mission and purpose. By focusing on the good, that helps us win over the battles of life. That's how we do it. Yaakov teaches that by being mission driven, we can be victorious. We learn to focus on our mission from Yaakov. That Yaakov tells us, be focused. We'll meet up with Esav when Mashiach comes. So that's another way of understanding the parsha. And I think a very good way of overcoming personal distractions is to be focused on the good that we need in our life. Yaakov Avinu was not a private individual on his own mission. He's the patriarch of the Jewish people. His mission is our mission. His actions give strength to our actions. When we realize how Yaakov is preparing us for our spiritual battles in the world, with the Esavs of the world, with the distractions of life. So let's go back to this Rashi. Rashi doesn't say that Yaakov was lengthening his journey to avoid his brother. Okay, that would have been Yarich. Instead, Rashi says Yaakov broadened his journey. He says Hirchiv. Yaakov was not telling Esav just that he would take a long time to reach the destination, Seir. Instead, Yaakov was implying that the nature of his travel was qualitatively different. Yaakov travels broadly. That's the way he understands this. He takes a journey encompassing many different aspects, many different needs and stops along the way. He'll arrive at Seir on his journey's terms, not because he needs simply to get from point A to point B. In other words, no matter how long it takes Yaakov to arrive in Seir to meet Esav, he's still on the way. Because the point is Yaakov's own journey for his own purposes rather than reaching Seir. Yaakov was really telling Esav the same thing we all tell our negative impulses, our own self-doubts. You're trying to set the terms for my journey. But I'm on my own mission with its own checklist. I'm traveling broadly. Catch me if you can. Hopefully we understand that Yaakov wasn't trying to trick Esav. He wasn't telling him, wait for me, deception. Instead, Yaakov really is always technically on his way. No matter where else Yaakov goes on his way to Seir, he's still on the way. Yaakov, not to see it as a deceptive message, but he's telling the truth. He's on the way. And we take this lesson for us as well. We're on the way to Mashiach. So, how are we on the way to Mashiach? By being mission-oriented, focused on where we need to go, on what we need to do, on what we're here to achieve. Of course, this is a lesson, a message for us too, in our strategy on overcoming our struggles and challenges. But I think there's another nuance. Why does Rashi tell us that there are many midrashic interpretations? What's the meaning of this? Why is that relevant for us to know? Rashi is hardly an encyclopedic collection. Rashi tells us what he feels is important for us to know. Why in this instance does he say, there's many other commentaries on this? And perhaps the message is that though Yaakov established our general method of dealing with Esav and dealing with the distractions of life, but perhaps Rashi's cryptic answer to us is telling us that, you know something? There are many midrashim. What does that mean? Every generation has its particular challenges. At one point, the challenge to the Jews were the descendants of Esav, the Romans. Even under the Romans, some decades were peaceful and others were quite difficult. Remember, they were the ones who destroyed the temple, but there were times when they were peaceful with us. At other times in history, our challenges are more spiritual and internal than external. There are other midrashim. Rashi says is telling us there are many, many midrashim. He's telling us there are many stories, many paths, many situations that we have in our life. So what is our generation's midrash message? Our specific mission to focus on in order to avoid the distractions and challenges of life? Our particular idea that the Rebbe emphasized is how are we going to be focusing on our mission. We're nearly there. We're at the end of the road. So Yaakov, according to this explanation, was not about deceiving his brother. He was showing us his true intentions to take a broad path through the entire exile, a journey that we as children, as descendants, will ultimately complete for him. Like we said, every generation has its challenges and struggles. But the Rebbe made it abundantly clear to us that our generation is the generation of redemption. Therefore, it's important that we learn about Mashiach, that we know how to conclude and complete this mission, that we reach our goal. And that's our generation's message. So if I were to put it this way, what is the focus? How do we overcome the distractions? The easy answer is to be mission-oriented, to be focused on the good, on the positive, and to say, how am I going to bring about redemption to the world? How am I going to realize the balance, the scales of the world in a positive direction, so we reach that final moment, the goal, the mission of Mashiach? Any questions?
Rabbi Benzi, I can't help but think of the current situation with Iran, who's out to destroy Israel. And therefore, if one adopts the strategy that Yaakov did, split your forces, okay, fine. Send gifts. I don't know about sending gifts to Iran in this day and age. I think the strategy has to be to focus on the positive, strengthen your own resources, and just carry on. And yes, prayer, of course, will help, but it's not a surefire formula to apply those three elements.
So I'll go back to the verse that starts off with that. That's a very good point you're mentioning. Yaakov sends messengers to Esav, his brother. He says, if he's Esav, if he's an enemy, if he's going to fight with me, then I'm ready for war and I'll beat him. And I'm going to show him that I'm prepared to knock him out. But if he's my brother, then I'll give him gifts because we'll make peace. Any peace deal that Israel made concessions where they weren't clearly to our benefit, then we lost. We got more intifadas, we got more problems, we got more trouble. It has to be clear that we have that upper, stronger hand. So therefore, Yaakov prepared in 3 ways to reproach his brother. The appeasement was there, but the appeasement will only work if he comes to me if he's with me as a brother. You're my brother. You want real, true peace? I'll take good care of you. I'll give you all these gifts. But if you're coming as Esav, if you're coming as an enemy, I'm ready for war. Of course, you always need the prayer because ultimately we know in God we trust. All others paid cash.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Benzi, anybody?
Well, I've got to, if I may change the subject a second, I've got a quick question about Hanukkah. I know it's early for Hanukkah, but Hanukkah's coming fast.
Yeah.
I'm going to be away on Erev Hanukkah. So I want to know can I light just one candle by itself with no Chanukiah, no shamas, no nothing? In a lit room, obviously, so the candle won't burn on. Can I light just one candle by itself?
Yeah. It should be a lit room because we can't benefit from the candle lights by itself. But you should make the bracha on the candle and you should be around the candle so that you are, that this is a Hanukkah candle for you, not just an ordinary candle in the room. But yes, you can. You're going to say all the brachas that night.
Yeah.
Okay. But yeah, you can do that. But the coming nights you could always set up a second candle, and you'll do it. Yeah, that's not a problem at all. Okay. Any other questions, ladies and gents? See you tomorrow, please, God. Thank you all for joining us today. Look forward to see you tomorrow.